Hey friends, I'm Asiatu,
And I'm Mairi.
and together we're the Audacious Autistics podcast. We're both queer, non-binary, intuitive coaches creating a safe space to discuss everything from autism to astrology, including social justice, intersectionality, and more, living unmasked and out loud.
Today's episode is all things Autism Acceptance Month. Many people don't understand how traumatizing this month can be for actual autistics. In this episode, we're going to talk about Autism Acceptance Month and how it varies from autism awareness and all of the things within that. First of all, we're autistic all of the time, but April is extremely hard as we're constantly bombarded with all kinds of different triggering content. So let's go ahead and get into it. First, I figure we should just talk about what Autism Acceptance Month is, or Autism Awareness Month. So basically, in the early 70s, Autism Awareness Month became a thing for children. And it was based around kind of letting the population know that there's some autistic kids that, and I'm putting this in air quotes, can be saved, right? So that's the basis of Autism Awareness Month, which is triggering. Like that alone is triggering. Yeah. So one of the main points of moving to Autism Acceptance Month is so that we can get away from that narrative of needing to be aware and where it's rooted from. So in 2011, ASAN, which is Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, started using autism acceptance instead of autism awareness. And that happened in 2011. And I'm going to quote them here, they put out a statement that said, acceptance of autism as a natural condition in the human experience is necessary for real dialogue to occur. And so that's the root reason why many autistic people have started using autism acceptance opposed to autism awareness. And that's kind of like just where I wanted to start with the basis of this conversation is around where we started, why it started with awareness, and why many autistic people are asking that the narrative get changed to acceptance, Autism Acceptance Month instead.
That makes sense. And I feel like awareness is so limiting in the sense of it's superficial. It's like being aware of something that doesn't really do much in the long term.
Yeah.
And now autism clearly is something that a lot of people are aware of, but yet still don't understand, the actual intricacies of it, how it presents, and knows how to support us. And there's so much misinformation out there that we're constantly having to combat and negate. So I completely embrace, acceptance versus awareness.
Yeah, and I think, awareness is typically rooted in centering other people, not exactly. The autistic people, right? It's all about centering others, which is a common theme that we'll find in things that we talk about with the autistic community is that a lot of the stuff is for the people that are around us and not for us. And I think that piece of it, like you had said, we're still not being supported, like people are aware that autism is real and there are autistic people, and we're still struggling so badly to be supported. And so there's this like gap that isn't being touched. And I think it's learning to center autistic people opposed to centering the people that are around us is a main shift in this as well.
I agree. And it's also, to me, it goes hand in hand with performative, acts. Having awareness just means like, hey, we exist, and if someone feels like, oh, I'm aware, therefore, I've done my part. And like, it just stops with that. Yeah. And again, that goes hand in hand with, performative justice and awareness and acceptance. And it's so much more than just being aware. Like plenty of people are aware that, racism exists, or plenty of people are aware that, trans people exist, but that doesn't translate to actual, acceptance, advocacy, understanding, support, etc.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's, it's damaging because there's this like blanket level of autism that gets seen by the world. And it's like we're accepted, in air quotes again, until we're actually showing autistic traits, because that's what society deems as the negative things of us, right? And
Exactly.
those things come out the majority of the time because we're not being supported, and we're hitting burnout, and we're, overstimulated. And,
Yep.
it's this whole gap in the system where we're being forced to live in a neurotypical society. And then when we can't do that, there's no support to like help us perform. Like, if we're going to be forced to live in a neurotypical society, can we at least get the support to be able to thrive in it? Because there's so much that autistic people can bring to this society, but we get left in the gaps, as you know, because there's no support around it. So, I know that you're on the same page, and that's why we're here, to talk about it. And, that support, is just so crucial, and it's being missed in so many different aspects.
I think one of the main aspects that support is missing is the misperceptions of what support looks like, and the misinformation of autism, which, goes hand in hand with support that is either toxic or abusive or unhelpful to us. And I think a lot of that clearly is rooted in Autism Speaks, which is an organization that clearly supports and markets really harmful and toxic information about autistics. And again, going back to what you're saying, where it's centered on neurotypicals and neurotypicals experiences of autistic people, not supporting, and centering the voices of actual autistics. And so we can go into there, just, segue right on into.
It's really hard to talk about this kind of stuff without talking about Autism Speaks, because Autism Speaks is what the majority of the population, at least in the United States, which is where we're both located, Autism Speaks is what most people outside of the autistic experience recognize, right? They're the ones that have the money and the platform. And so it's really hard to not talk about that these harmful things are rooted within Autism Speaks. And so I think it's fair for us to kind of go into all of the things Autism Speaks and how it's so harmful for our community. So I'm all for it. I think it ties into Autism Acceptance Month, because a lot of the stuff that's triggering for us in the world is rooted in Autism Speaks, right? So Light It Up Blue, the puzzle piece, ABA therapy. So all of these things are harmful, and harmful to us as autistics, harmful to the autistic community, and yet they lie with Autism Speaks. So I think it's fair to go into it. I'm all for it. If you want to go there.
All right, let's take a dive.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's address the puzzle piece first.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that for me personally is so triggering within Autism April, is seeing it everywhere.
Yes.
And what people don't understand or don't realize is it's ableist. It's, first of all, infantilizing autism, because as you had mentioned, the history of autism has always been very much connected to children. And, autistic adults exist and the children grow up. So autism is something that cannot be cured. It is not something that goes away. It is something that we will have. It's just a core part of who we are. So a puzzle piece as an adult, when it's centered all around, children, is just in and of itself unsettling and disrespectful.
Yeah.
It also wasn't, created by us again. It was created specifically by neurotypical people who wanted to put out their perspective of what autism is.
Yeah.
And you can just jump in.
That's where I was going to, is that this puzzle piece, when I talk to autistics now that aren't aware of the damage, right? Because within our own community, Autism Speaks has, taken over even within our community. So there's autistics as well who support the puzzle piece at first before they really understand. The thing about the autistic community, one of the things that I love about the autistic community is when you can present them with facts and understanding the entirety of a situation, we're really, the majority of us are really able to kind of shift our perspective when we have the facts there. And I think that's one of the things that is important about this podcast is just getting out the information, because I feel like once autistic people in general have the solid fact and information and the time to process those things, they can remove their emotions. But a lot of the autistic community that has grown up with Autism Speaks, being that advocate, again in air quotes, for them, they've had to learn to like and support the puzzle piece. And a lot of things that I hear from the autistic community is they've had to make up their own narrative about the puzzle piece in order to like it. And so they've come up with this whole story about how the puzzle piece is actually, like not what it was rooted in, right? Autism Speaks rooted the puzzle piece in the fact that we're missing, there's a piece of us missing, right? Exactly. That is the root of the puzzle piece, is that there are pieces of us missing, and that is bullshit. We are whole humans, what I mean? And so, but a lot of autistics have had to change that story in their mind to be able to connect with it. And I think that's such a shame when there are so many other symbols that we could use. And so, there have been new symbols that have come out to kind of anchor into. So if you are someone that is connected to the puzzle piece, then I would just advise you to look at, the links that we will post with this podcast in the descriptions. We'll have links for you to look up more of the stuff that we talk about and really understanding the root of where it came from and some other options for you. My favorite is the rainbow infinity piece, but I know that there's a lot of other, infinity signs and other signs that are in the works to try to, and these are ones that come from autistics, right? Not neurotypicals putting symbols on us and saying, here you go, you get to have this. Like, thank you.
Which is exactly, no thanks. So I was just going to also say the other part of, the puzzle piece symbolizing a piece missing, it also symbolizes how our condition was quote unquote puzzling to neurotypicals, which again is also offensive in that, it others us, and it also makes us seem like we're just so beyond understanding, which ironically totally contradicts, what acceptance means. And, it's just really frustrating. So yes, we, are puzzling, but we're no less puzzling than, anybody else, and and whether neurotypical or not. And it's just a part of human nature that, of course, not everybody's going to understand you, but to pigeonhole us into, this limited perception of they're just so confusing, or they're just
here's
so
the
hard
irony.
to understand.
Here's the irony for me. I find neurotypicals and holistics super confusing. Like they're really puzzling to me. So it's just a difference in communication styles and in, like mind and neurology. Like it's just different. It's and yeah, so same page with the puzzle piece. Is there a symbol or anything for you that you resonate with right now, or are you still waiting for the autistic community to come up with something?
I love the rainbow infinity symbol, and I love it for so many reasons, but one, I've always been a fan of the infinity symbol in and of itself, which is why 8 is my favorite number. But also just because it's I like infinity in the sense that it's a part of who we are and it's forever ongoing. It's not something that's ever going to change or be cured, quote unquote. I like that. I like the fact that it has the different colors, but also to support those of us, a lot of within the community who are queer. So I love the use of the rainbow, and it's just, to me, it's just poetic, and it's just really, it's also really powerful, to me, the concept of infinity and always, and it also supports the idea that we've always been here, that we always will be here, and that we will continue to be here. And so I like that concept as well. So yeah, I love the infinity symbol And I know that some people use the gold specifically for autism, and the gold infinity symbol, because of the AU periodical reference to gold. So, and of course the AU of autism.
And red. I've seen both of them used for the infinity and for red instead, which we'll get into in a minute, red instead. And, you know, I agree with everything you said. I think you put it perfectly. Like all of the things that it encompasses for me are similar to you. You know, I've had this tie to my queerness forever. And so the rainbow symbol for me was always a big deal. And then the infinity, and not only the infinity, but also the rainbow-ness almost being a spectrum, right? And so how autism shows up so differently and connects so differently to each of us. I think it's a beautiful thing. I do know that there are some people within our community that aren't like super supportive of the infinity symbol. So I know that it hasn't been deemed like the one, right, officially yet. But I think it has the most you know, like acceptance so far within the community. And we're such a community of creatives. You'll hear me say it all the time, my community of creatives, that I imagine that, you know, it'll just blossom from here as we continue to build community and work together as an autistic community, opposed to what's been happening for so long, which is we have to live within this community that has been built and structured by neurotypicals, Aulistics, especially Autism Speaks. So I think moving from the puzzle piece into this infinity sign and figuring out, is it gold, is it red, is it rainbow, and how that looks for us as a community is really exciting. But I agree with you. I absolutely love the rainbow infinity. And I was planning to get an infinity sign as a tattoo prior to even knowing that it was tied to autism or getting my own like diagnosis as an autistic adult. So I've had that same tie to the infinity symbol. And so to see it kind of all come together for me in my experience has been really, really exciting.
I agree.
Yeah.
And also we should say that the infinity symbol, the rainbow infinity symbol, is for neurodiverse.
Yes.
Not specifically just for autism. So it's all encompassing of the whole spectrum, from, you know, aulistics, aulistics and neurotypical to everybody else. It's the whole entire spectrum.
Yeah. And we're going to do real quick, we're going to do episodes in the future about neurodiversity and what is neurodivergent and all that stuff. So I know that a lot of people out there that are listening may not understand what that is. So we'll be sure to drop links and information on our own pages. And then we're also going to be covering it in future episodes as well. So be sure to let us know if there's anything specific you have questions on or anything you want us to talk about specifically. And, you know, that's what we're here to help educate and bring, you know, awareness and acceptance to our communities, for our communities. And so be sure to let us know what it is you're looking for to learn about, but we're going to touch on all of this stuff in the future. And thank you so much for bringing up the fact that it's neurodiversity and not just autistic, because sometimes I even get stuck on that, right? Like, oh, this is mine.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not really.
It's not. I'm the same way. I love it so much. I'm just like, yes, it's us, it's ours. Yeah. And I'm just like, oh yeah, that's right. Like it's the full spectrum.
Yeah, which I think is where the gold one comes into play, because it is just for the autistic community. And when we talk about gold, Asiatu had mentioned before, that's because a lot of autistics use AU as the abbreviation for autism. I think that comes from Australia and the UK. I think they do that a lot. Is that correct?
I'm not sure where it came from. I just know the correlation to the periodic table of the
which
AU.
Is what
but I do see a lot of people. I do see a lot of, I will say, UK and Australia people on Facebook with their profile name. They'll have the AU as an indication of them being autistic.
Yeah. So somebody let us know.
Yeah. Feel free to let us know.
Somebody let us know, or we'll find the answer for you. But either way, that's where the gold comes in, is with that AU tying it to the periodic table.
Yep.
And then I do want to talk about red instead, because we talked about that a little bit too. Red instead versus lighted up blue. So do you want to go into that a little bit?
So lighted up blue, again, was something rooted and connected to Autism Speaks. It also, the color blue itself was chosen by neurotypicals to represent autism because they initially thought it was just a boy issue, or it just presented itself in boys, which is also clearly false, hence us being here. But also, it was initially, the traits of autism were founded on specifically white boys.
Yeah.
And so that's why they picked they chose the color blue. And so Autism Speaks pushes the whole lighted up blue for autism, which again is infantilizing as well as problematic, because clearly there are plenty of us who don't identify as male that exist that are autistic. And it also prevents a lot of people who aren't male from being diagnosed, because the traits are so limited in their scope and of presentation, which we're actually going to discuss at some point also in the future,
for sure,
on a different episode.
Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah.
So red instead, you can talk about the red instead part.
Yeah. So scrolling through timelines on April and seeing all of this blue stuff can be very triggering and activating for a lot of autistics, because lighted up blue being based in what it's based in and rooted from, again, Autism Speaks and neurotypicals and holistics, it totally missed an entire group of people being diagnosed. And I'm talking about people that are AFAB, assigned female at birth, people that are, display more feminine traits in the autistic world. So we are in the autistic world getting away from gendering, but sometimes in order to recognize what we're talking about, we have to start where we are. And so they see these as male traits in the autistic world. And a lot of them, you'll see it in TV shows and in movies. It's that same stereotype autistic. And lighted up blue is directly correlated to that stigma that has caused so many of us to try to survive in this world without understanding why we're struggling to survive in this neurotypical world, because we're autistic. But because of this lighted up blue and this super hyper focus on cis male white boys and autism being this like main correlation, there's so many things that have been missed. And I think that's the main reason why seeing the blue everywhere can be so activating and so triggering. And the reason, one of the reasons we're talking about all of this is because we understand that people don't know until they know, like I was telling Asiatu just the other day that I was going through my own memories on Facebook, and 10 plus years ago, I was also promoting Autism Speaks because I was ignorant. I didn't know any different. I hadn't been diagnosed yet. I hadn't gone into anything. I knew Autism Speaks because that's what everybody knows.
Yep.
But now you know better. So we do better.
Exactly. As Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better.
Yeah.
And so we're all on a journey, and there's no destination. It's just constant work and addressing issues within ourselves and just growth as a community over time. So I'm seeing the blue, it just makes me so angry, not only because it's related to Autism Speaks, but also because, again, like, I'm not a white boy. So it's just so disrespectful to me. And it's triggering for me, honestly. And I do my best to try to educate people just so they know, because like you said, clearly a lot of people aren't aware that it's harmful or hurtful to other people. And I will say that majority of the time I'm received well. Of course, there are times where I'm not, and people get defensive, but I think that generally speaking, it's starting to trend more so towards understanding and openness and learning.
Yeah. So I think it's important to get your perspective as someone that is not white, right, on
Exactly.
the damage that falls in that. And again, we're going to talk much more about intersectionality as we move forward with our episodes, but I think this is key here too, because, you know, we've seen it multiple times within our community with even the groups that are led by autistics. White people come in and white people do what white people do. And so I think it's important for you to be able to share your experience here, if you're willing to kind of just talk about, you know, I know there was a situation where being autistic was traumatizing and hard enough. And then
Yes.
it was compounded by the fact that it was happening to you as a Black person. So
Yep.
can you go through that experience that happened, like all your excitement about this month, and then how that was kind of halted when the reality of the month hit?
Sure. So I was diagnosed last year. Actually, Mairi helped me discover that I was autistic, and then I was medically diagnosed. So this is my first official year of Autism April or autism awareness that I had experienced. And going into it, I was clearly excited, and I was like, yay, you know, it's a month that, you know, is centered around, you know, my experiences, my stories, my narrative, perception, education, and, you know, being an educator. Clearly, I was like, this is going to be amazing. Just kidding.
Back.
So the first part was, like you said, being triggered by seeing a whole lot of misinformation. You just get bombarded as an autistic in April with all of this misinformation, from Autism Speaks, Lighted Up Blue, to puzzle pieces, to just everything you can imagine that, you know, ABA therapy, which we hadn't even talked about
We
yet,
haven't even touched.
which we will shortly. So it was just, that in and of itself was overwhelming. But then on top of that, I was a part of the Twitch community, which is a platform that was rooted in gaming. But once the pandemic hit, a lot of DJs started using it as a means to play music. So it was just a place for like community camaraderie, you know, music. You get to chat, you know, while the DJ is DJing, and just interact with other people in the chat rooms and things of that nature. So it was generally a community that pretty much sprung out of the pandemic and people being stuck at home and needing entertainment and wanting to connect to each other and things of that nature. So then it started transitioning into people using their platform on Twitch, specifically DJs coming together for different causes. And one group decided to come together for specifically for autism. So I will say that this group of people, there were two different events within that. The first event was a group of, I believe, like 5 or 6, all people of, well, majority Black, but one non-Black of color person. And they were all parents of autistic kids or had some type of personal relationship with autistic people. And then there was one who was a special education teacher. So they had experience working with children, autistic children. And that in and of itself, exactly, that in and of itself, the lack of representation of actual an autistic person made me feel erased, invalidated, and unsupported and unseen. And that's common within our community, is that either the neurotypical perspective in general is perpetuated, usually via Autism Speaks, or their neurotypical perception via parents of autistic kids is centered. And, you know, we don't get representation.
Yeah.
And like I said, I was just kind of caught off guard with that in and of itself. The dynamics in and of itself, I thought, was just mind-blowing in a negative way. And then I tried to talk to other people just in general. I was just like, so say you're part of a press group, say as a Black man, if you saw a panel discussing, the experiences of what it means to be a Black man, and the whole panel was made up of white women, or the whole panel was made up of Black women, like, would you feel safe or confident or comfortable that what they're saying is actually going to be an authentic representation of what it is that you go through? Same with, a non-binary person. If a whole bunch of cis people, and cis hetero people had a panel to discuss what it means to be non-binary, I mean, that's triggering. And it happens to oppressed people all the time, whether it's Black, women, especially when it comes to women and body autonomy and things of that nature. When a whole bunch of men are making decisions or trying to express, perceptions of what it is to be a woman, it's problematic because privilege gives you blind spots and limits your perception. So going back to being on Twitch, I was in that group and in that chat room, and basically everything that I was saying was countered by the parents, or a couple of the parents. And I identified myself as, I don't know if they saw it because they were talking, so I don't know if they were aware of the chat or whatever. I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, but needless to say, regardless of it, it shouldn't have happened the way that it did. But I was basically constantly gaslit and invalidated. Everything that I said was attempted, they attempted to negate. One of the classic sayings is, you can't speak for all autistics. And I don't speak for all autistics, but like any community, no community is a monolith in the sense that they're all the same, but they're community standards. Mm-hmm. And so just like, in the Black community, we don't want to be called colored anymore. And we prefer African-American or BIPOC or other terms. Or, in the queer community, or, the LGBTQ plus community, certain terms just aren't accepted anymore. And because, it's deemed offensive. Same with women. Like, we generally tend not to be to be referred to as females because Right. It's disrespectful. So every group of, people who have shared experiences pretty much have a general community standard of how they would like to be addressed, how they'd like to be supported, etc. So I never say that I speak for all autistics, and I don't think any autistic would say they speak for all autistics, because not only that, generally it goes against humanity, but also autistics vary individually because it is a spectrum, that no two autistics are the same. So we are well aware of the fact that, we can't speak for the whole community. Yeah. So that was one example of them invalidating me. And then I had mentioned something about basically Autism Speaks or organizations, and they basically tried to say, well, just because you read something on the internet doesn't mean that, these organizations basically don't believe everything that you read. And some organizations actually do good work and, within the autistic community, even though autistics, we clearly say that they're not and are problematic. So then there was a second.
And one good thing does not take away from all of the harm. Like,
exactly.
And that's a blanket statement to anybody that needed to hear that. Like,
exactly. Like, so yeah. So then there was, that was the first event. And then later it was a basically all day event of different DJs, basically back to back, discussing autism awareness. So later that evening, I had a friend of mine who I'd known for many years, and he had asked me to be in the chat and to support his stream.
And he was part of the main group of people doing this thing,
he was
typical.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I would say holistic. I think there's some divergence. Okay. But definitely not autistic.
Okay.
And he was one of the DJs. The group that I was referring to earlier was more of a platform forum of the parents, and then were followed by multiple DJs basically playing music and discussing autism. So He was one of the DJs that followed. He had asked me before his stream, 10 autism facts. He had told me that he was doing it and wanted me to be a part of it. He was, implying that he was doing it in support of me and, it being autism awareness.
Making
So I
space
gave
for
him
you. Yeah.
yes. So I gave him, a list of like 10 things or whatever. And then when I got in there, again, the same thing happened. Whenever I was trying to do general facts that go against the misperceptions, which tend to be the mainstream, I got a whole lot of backlash to the point where I was tone policed. I was told to only talk about quote unquote facts. And I'm like, I am talking about facts. Like, they're just not the mainstream facts, which are wrong. And I was told, not to be so pessimistic and negative, which as autistics, we hear quite often all the time. Exactly. We're realistic, not pessimistic. And I was just, at the end of it, like, I was just crying. And I was just like, of all the times and of all the places, a place where people are actually speaking, supposedly speaking in support of autistics, I'm being invalidated, gaslit, and just anything I said, was scrutinized and tone policed. And I was not only hurt that it was happening, but I was also hurt that my supposed friend, who I'd known literally for about 20 years of my life, couldn't handle the reaction of the people, and instead kowtowed towards the general quote unquote public of the chat, as opposed to supporting me, who's actually autistic, again, which happens a lot within our community. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I was just super hurt, super drained, super overwhelmed, emotional. I lost a friend in the process. We no longer are friends anymore because of this. And yeah, and that was not the first or the last incident that I had to deal with being invalidated when I was trying to educate other people about stuff that they were doing that they were unaware that was hurtful or toxic to our community. And again, that's why it's so important that our voices as actual autistics are heard, are valued, are seen as, value, and that we can express our perceptions so that, these misperceptions can finally stop. And Autism Speaks is one of the huge reasons why these misperceptions exist. They spend millions of dollars per year in marketing and in commercializing and in sending out their message. They also
like 80% of the money that they raise goes to pushing their agenda.
And the CEO makes significantly six figures. I want to say at least in the 300,000. And they also are connected to the medical industry, where a lot of therapists and or pediatricians, doctors, neurologists will say, oh, your child seems to be autistic. You should go to Autism Speaks. Here's some information so that, you can become educated about autism. And then what happens is these parents get educated with these misperceptions. And then when we as adult autistics say, hey, that's not really true, or that's harmful or hurtful, they literally don't believe us. And they choose to ignore what we're saying because they're like, well, I got it from my teachers, or I got it from my doctor, or I got it from my therapist or the neurologist, or blah, blah, blah. So who are you to say, as an individual based, you're going against, these people who are in the field of medical, in the medical field, who have all this education and stuff, who are you to say to go against that, and that's what's so frustrating, because there's a lot of ableism in the education of the medical system in and of itself. So a lot of therapists are ableist already. And so,
I think a lot of what happens with Autism Speaks and the parents, from what I've seen in my experience, is that autism, the idea of having a child that is autistic when you go to Autism Speaks is like, oh, you need to grieve. This is going to be the worst thing of your life. So Autism Speaks, as an abuser, will tear down the parents and formulate this negative ball, put them in it, and then, as an abuser does, they will provide them resources to help them out of the ball that they put them in. And so there's this attachment that a lot of autistic parents of autistic children go through with Autism Speaks, where they have this relationship like, oh, Autism Speaks has done all of this good for me. Yeah, after they tore you down and they told you this false image of your child, so
Exactly.
but before we go on, I just want to thank you for sharing your experience. I think that it is so valuable for other people to be able to hear your lived experience and how it shows up for actual people, because I know that you're not alone in having that backlash, and having someone else hear you say it can be so helpful to them. So thank you for being vulnerable and being able to share your experience with us and our community, because it is invaluable. And I, as you were telling me about it, when it was happening, I was just mortified, but unfortunately not surprised, because it happens so often to autistic people, especially autistic people that are Black, brown, melanated at all. And
Exactly.
so it is such a triggering space to be in when, as a Black person, a Black autistic queer person, you are still stepping in to try and educate in spaces where they might say it's a safe space. They might say it's a safe space. But at the end of the day, we can't say we're going to make this space safe for anyone, because that is for me to say, right? I can't come to you as a Black person and say, I'm going to make this a safe space for you, right?
No.
Because I am not you.
Exactly.
And so I think it's so just powerful that you have taken your lived experience and the things that you're going through, and you have built this space. And so I am honored to witness you and just be here with you as you tell your experience for other people to connect with, because I find it just invaluable. So thank you for sharing, what happened to you and what happens to other people in our community. Because people need to understand, like, when we come in as autistics, we are not speaking for every single autistic. Like, we know that there are some autistic people who still like the puzzle piece.
Yeah, exactly.
But as a community of autistics, it is harmful, it is damaging, and that happens on so many different levels. So thank you for telling your story here, and thank you for entering those spaces that are difficult and triggering and still showing up for our community, because we're honored to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
And speaking of harmful things, Autism Speaks, another thing that they support that is truly controversial in our community is ABA therapy. And ABA therapy, I just want to say in a nutshell, when I just tell people, and I was just like, ABA therapy was created by the same man who created gay conversion therapy.
Yep.
That alone should tell you how toxic it is.
Yep.
And basically, ABA therapy is conversion therapy for autistics. So it teaches autistics to appear and act and function as a neurotypical, so that they could perpetuate the agenda that autism is quote unquote cured.
Yep.
And it's, again, not something that, first of all, needs to be cured, and it's not something that can be cured, but the therapy itself is at the cost of our mental health. So if we are teaching someone not to be who they are, not to do stimming, which helps us regulate, not to, express ourselves the way in which we want to or in which we need for emotional health and stability, it teaches us to hide who we are and parts of who we are, which sends a message basically that there's something wrong with us, and then we internalize that. And can you imagine being in a therapy that's constantly correcting you and telling you who you are naturally is not right? So there's a large amount of people of adult autistics who have survived ABA therapy that have PTSD from the therapy. There's also plenty of information that is out now that says ABA therapy doesn't work. Surprise, sarcastically, because it's not a real therapy, it's behaviorism. And it's basically in the same concept of, teaching a dog certain tricks, but instead of
dog training. Yeah.
It's dog training, basically.
Yeah.
And, so if so a lot of parents try to use it as, oh, my kid is speaking more, or my kid is doing so much better. They're doing so much better, quote unquote, is equivalent to them hiding who they are. Them doing so much better is at the cost of their authentic selves, which obviously clearly has negative consequences. Mm-hmm. So ABA therapy within the autistic community, as a majority standard, we're against it. It is abuse. Yeah. And it's toxic and hurtful and harmful. And I understand that they were going to try to spin it as something that's positive and say that, oh, well, my child is doing better. Your child is appearing to do better, sure, but at what cost?
Well, internally? And I think that, again, goes back to that root of Autism Speaks and how everything is rooted in all the people around the autistic. Right? Yeah. So ABA is all about making autism able to be around, right? Exactly. We have to be able to show up and be quote unquote nice and be quote unquote social and all of these things that are neurotypical societal constructs. And, ABA is rooted in needing a cure for who we are. And, there is this spin on the new ABA, right? And I know a ton of people that, I am the same age as, finishing schooling or going through schooling to be an ABA therapist still. And it's this new ABA. And it's all rooted in the same stuff where we're mm-hmm. changing and we're not hearing autistic people. And they don't have to be verbal or they don't have to be vocal for us to hear autistic people, right? There are so many different ways that we communicate. Yep. There's a difference in an autistic meltdown and a child having a tantrum, and ABA therapy has a hard time seeing the difference. And mm-hmm. that is a shame. That is a problem. And it's mm-hmm. a problem that needs to be looked at and deconstructed. And I think that comes back to the importance of having autism acceptance versus autism awareness. Like people that do ABA are aware that autism is a thing, but they do not accept us. And that is period point blank, because if they did, there wouldn't be this need for ABA therapy, and I hear all the time, like, well, don't you think people need help? Yeah, for sure. People need help. Yes. I didn't say anywhere in this conversation that people don't need help and support.
Exactly.
Right? But it needs to be based and rooted in the person that you're helping and support, not the people surrounding. And that is one of my main issues with ABA. Like, I'm all for therapies. I mm-hmm. love it.
Occupational therapy, speech therapy, but speech therapy centered on the different ways of communication, yes. not just focused on speaking.
Yes.
Because that is detrimental as well. Mm-hmm. And I know for me personally, speaking is very difficult for me. It takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of focus, mm-hmm. which is just draining in and of itself. And my first language isn't spoken. My first language is intuition and then feelings.
Right.
And then I have to figure out how to then put that into words. And then I have to put it in words in which people don't perceive me in the wrong tone, or I'm rude or whatever. So it's a whole lot of going on in my brain just to say words.
Yes.
And ABA is very much heavily forcing autistic children to speak. Yeah. And then you have
one of the goal points.
Exactly. If you have a child that now speaks more, but then is also now having more sensory overload and meltdowns, and then you're punishing the child for having the meltdowns in which you perpetuated and created an environment to happen. Yeah. So it's just so frustrating, because I'm just like, it again, like you said, it's just rooted in us not being allowed to be who we are and not supporting us in ways that are helpful to us.
Yeah. And, I can recognize how difficult as a parent or a caregiver it would be to have this vision and dream of hearing your child say, I love you, and not being able to have that, and that being harmful and painful. And I understand that, and I recognize that, and they have therapy for you for that. You know, like, this is not, well, I'm upset about that, so I'm going to force my child to communicate the way that I want them to communicate. That's not how life works.
Exactly.
You know, well, it's not how life should work.
Should work,
you know, because
exactly.
then we get autistic adults that are now, you know, like, we are the age of the autistic adults that went through ABA therapy. And
Yep.
so there are all of these adult autistics who are coming out and saying, this therapy is really harmful, and this is what it did for me, right? So much CPTSD, which is, for our listeners, is complex PTSD, which is PTSD that happens, that's on a reoccurring basis, right? So consistently being, you know, held accountable for doing X, Y, and Z can cause CPTSD. So autistic adults now that have gone through ABA are coming out as adults saying this is really harmful. And then you have Autism Speaks, and you have, you know, teachers and educators that are saying, no, you're wrong.
Exactly.
You're wrong.
Like, what? How?
You know,
How?
yeah, and it's just like so frustrating as adults.
Invalidating,
Yes, and
gaslighting, all the
invalidating
above.
to see this next group of autistic children being dropped into the gaps again, and we're not being heard in the month where we're supposed to be heard. You know, like, this is the month that you're supposed to be aware that we're here. So if you're aware that you're here, can you at least listen to us? But no.
Exactly. It's just, oh, just to piggyback on what you said, PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes.
And then CPTSD is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So PTSD is usually a result of one event, or, you know, a traumatizing experience, which is limited within that one experience. Complex PTSD is multiple triggering, multiple experiences layered upon each other. So therefore it's more complex and also has more effect on multiple aspects of the person's life.
Yes,
another aspect of ABA, which really relates to this, is that in ABA therapy, they have this understanding or this belief that one can desensitize an autistic person to something. So for us, we are hypersensitive to sounds or, you know, smells or things of that nature. And in ABA therapy, they teach that over time, if you expose us to it basically enough, that it will become desensitized, and therefore we will stop having such extreme reactions to whatever that trigger is. The reality is, which is a very neurotypical way of looking at things, because that's how neurotypicals are. But hey, we're not neurotypical. Surprise! So the way it works for us is, if we are super sensitive to something and have a reaction, whether it be a meltdown or a shutdown or whatever the case is, it's because it physically hurts us. Like, it's not a matter of discomfort. It's not a matter of choice. It literally causes us physical pain and harm. And so what you're doing basically is you're triggering a child over and over again and hopes of desensitization, when all it does is causes them pain over and over and over and over again, which then in turn traumatizes them over and over again, which in turn creates CPTSD.
Yeah.
So that's one of the roots of ABA that is so harmful, especially to kids who don't necessarily have a voice, who are ignored when they try to communicate their discomfort via meltdowns or other quote unquote negative behaviors. That's a form of communication. So that's a child saying, hey, this hurts, I don't like this. And instead, basically ABA says, oh, okay, well, we're just going to continue to do it. And it's, you know, we're going to intensify it because obviously their threshold is higher. So therefore they'll eventually become desensitized. We don't. Yeah. It's not going to work.
And so when you see, to our listeners, when you see someone saying ABA is abusive, this is what they're talking about. And so I hope that that gives a better understanding around why some autistics are so against ABA, why the autistic community as a whole is against ABA therapy and see it as harmful. It's because it is harmful. And although it might not be causing blatant harm that you can see right now, doesn't mean that there isn't harm. And we know that there is, because there are now autistic adults telling us that their ABA therapy has caused them harm. We have people in the medical field that are autistic that are also saying these therapies cause harm, they are harmful. And so my hope here is that, you know, one or two more people have gotten that understanding around why ABA is harmful, and that there is support needed. And it's not that the autistic community isn't open to support. It's just that this isn't support.
This isn't the way. This ain't it.
Support. Yeah, like
Exactly.
It is support maybe of the people surrounding the autistic people, right? But even that is based on the fear and the pain and the sadness that was brought into this autistic diagnosis from companies like Autism Speaks.
Autism Speaks, exactly.
You know, go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say ABA therapy is it's very similar to corporal punishment. So you may get the same results in the sense of, okay, if you have a kid who changes their behavior because of fear of punishment or pain or abuse, you can sit up there and say, hey, their behaviors have changed. They're doing better. No, they're not. They're just scared. They're just hurt. And they're fearful of the consequences more than their actual behavior. But that doesn't equate to actual support, nor does that equate to mentally healthy people. So a lot of people will argue my child is doing so much better. And again, like you said, Mary, at what cost? They might appear to be doing better now in this moment because of the fear of the consequences, but what's that long-term effect of them not being able to be who they are, of that fear of every time they do something, that being triggered, and that anxiety, and that, you know, fight or flight, fawn or freeze response that they have for just being themselves. That is just so sad, infuriating, and just invalidating on every level. And that's what I want parents to understand. And I'm not saying that you knew, and when autistics tell you ABA therapy is abuse, we're not blaming you. We know that you got misled. We know the information's out there. We know the systemic ableism of the medical field and Autism Speaks. We're well aware of it. But what we want you to do is listen to what we're telling you, in the sense of you need to shift your perspective of what you feel progress is. And if progress is always rooted in appearing neurotypical, you're doing your child a disservice, period. And you're causing harm.
Yes.
And that's what we want you to hear.
Yes. Yes. And I think that gave me cold chills. That was so powerful. Yeah. I think you nailed it with that. It's that, you know, you might be trying to set us up to be able to survive in this society, but this society is not set up for us to survive. And so we need you as the parents, as the caregivers, as our friends, to help make a space where we can be our authentic, audacious, autistic selves and thrive there, right? Like it is a societal problem, and we need the help of the neurotypicals and the holistics of the world. And that starts with listening, just listening to us, you know, as actual autistics. And so thank you for
and not only that, like, we want systemic change, obviously, clearly that will be helped a lot. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, But for those parents who are afraid of their child not being well received by the world or struggling in the world for being different, what I want to tell you is having you in their corner, whether you're the parent, caregiver, aunt, uncle, sister, brother, having a support system, a nuclear support system, a village within their world, specifically to them, helps wonders. So even though the outside world might not accept your child, if they have those support systems in place, if they have a community in which they can turn to, we don't give a fuck about the outside world.
Right.
Like we care in the sense of us it being oppressive, but as far as our day-to-day, I'm so happy and content with being around those who authentically see me, support me, and validate me. Mairi, you being one who's included in that, who is part of my village keeps me grounded. My village keeps me mentally healthy. My village allows me to be who I am, so that even if I do go out into the world of neurotypical lands, I have enough confidence, support, and love and understanding and self-awareness of myself that I can function without it, completely decimating who I am and decimating me. Is it still difficult? Of course. Is it still draining? Yes, it's still stressful, but I can do it so much better knowing that I have a whole community that supports me. And then if I go into that neurotypical world and I'm stressed the fuck out, guess who I'm going to turn to help balance me and ground me? I'm going to turn right back around to my community and say, hey, this happens to me. I need to vent. Or, hey, this happens to me. I just need some support. Or, hey, this happened to me. Has it happened to you? Or what should I do? Or how did you handle it? Or what are some resources? Or what are some supports that you would suggest that I do? So we can still function in a world that doesn't accept us if we have a village that does accept us. And that is the most important thing. So don't try to push your child to conform to the what ifs of the world, to fit into the world. Accept your child as they are, support them in being who they are, so they're so fucking confident and loved and supported that they have resources to go to, people to turn to, that when this neurotypical world doesn't accept them, they have a place where they can go that they are. And that's just if you listen to nothing else I say, as a parent, child, caregiver, connection person to someone who is autistic, please just hear that. It's not about the rest of the world. It's about their village, and just 100%. Be a part of their village.
100%. Fully agree. Thank you so much for your words and your wisdom. If anybody here wants to connect or find Asiatu online, their plug is at Asiatu Coach on Instagram, right?
Yep. On Instagram, Twitter. And you can find Asiatu. I think if you look up Asiatu Coach on Facebook, I'll pop up. But
cool. And we'll put all of our descriptions, or all of our stuff in the description here. I just want to thank you so much for joining us for this episode regarding Autism Acceptance Month. We release episodes monthly, but if you want to receive more content, one-on-one conversation with us, or you just want to help support us, we would be honored to have you on our Patreon, where we offer exclusives, bonus episodes, live chat forums, and more. You can find us on social media at audacious.autistics, or email us directly at audacious.autistics@gmail.com. Be sure to find us for next month's episode on clearing Cluster B personality stigmas.
And for you, people can find you where?
At MM Healing Services, or at the Audacious Autistic. Nope, that's our tag, Audacious Autistics. But you can find me at the Autistic Astrologer on Facebook and on YouTube. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, guys.